the Christian Circle podcast, and you're listening to Pamela Fernandes, where we have conversations about Christian living. Here's the show.
My name is Charles Johnston, and I'm a convert to Catholicism from evangelical Protestantism. I was raised Presbyterian and evangelical, and I converted to Catholicism at age 30. I've been Catholic for a few years now, and I have a blog at nowthatimcatholic.com, and where I post periodic articles, and also a Facebook page that I put videos, usually Sunday scripture reflections.
And so you usually do this podcast with us about different saints. So
Yeah,
who is
kind of a monthly.
Yeah. So who is the saint that we're talking about today?
This month we're talking about St. John Bosco, commonly referred to as Don Bosco, and he was a saint from the 19th century in Italy. He was a priest. He really specialized. Kind of his charism was helping young people, mostly like young boys. He's seen a big need for young boys to have direction in their life, so they didn't end up in a life of crime or just petty theft and things like that. So that's what he focused pretty much his entire life's work was on, helping young people, and especially young boys, avoid a life of crime, avoid kind of that street urchin life that was really rampant in the industrial age in most of Europe and even the Americas. Yeah, so he really he dedicated his life to helping these young boys and young men to really find a purpose in their life. Because if you're just out there on the street and you have nothing greater than yourself really to look up to feel called and led towards, then really all morality is subjective from that point. Then falling into, like I said, a life of crime or doing different things, getting into vices and stuff, and not practicing virtue really becomes easier and easier the more you get disconnected from God and from morality itself. So that's what he was trying to kind of keep them connected to God and to the church, and through that he would reach out to them and try to bring them into the fold. Well, he was born in Italy in I think it was 1814 or 1815. So it's right after Napoleon was really war ravaged at that point, especially the part of Italy he was from, and it was just really a bad time. And then he's born. He was the youngest of 9 or 10 kids, and his father dies when he was 2 years old. So he grew up already, disadvantaged, already in poverty, and then for the breadwinner of the family to die was just almost a death sentence for the family back then. And I mean, it's hard enough nowadays, but imagine what it would have been like in 1816 Italy. And he had to kind of grow up quicker than really what most kids usually do. And by the age of 12, he had ran away from home, and he was looking for work, and he worked a bunch of different manual labor jobs. I can't imagine hiring a 12-year-old to do manual labor, but I guess it's a different time, different age. But yeah, he had a lot of experience with that, kind of that street life himself. Yeah, he was very devout as a child. Like, they went to church a lot together as a family, went to mass a lot. He was very devout as a child, and he actually had several dreams and visions that he was going to do something great for God as an adult. He kind of held on to that, and it gave him purpose. Like I said, everyone needs a purpose in life, and he felt that he had his purpose. And he would go out, and he was really impressed by a traveling circus troupe. He was like 8 or 9 years old, and he was impressed with magic tricks and card tricks and stuff. And so he would gather around as a child. He would gather kids around with magic tricks, and then he would repeat the homily that he heard the priest say at Mass after he got their attention, so it kind of grabbed their attention and then give them actual substance. And there was a priest that took him in when he was about 15 years old, and he ended up becoming canonized himself. This priest, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he ended up becoming canonized himself, and he took him in and kind of guided him to where he already had felt a calling towards the priesthood, but he kind of mentored him.
And what about his ministry then? What is so special about his?
St. Francis DeSales was a bishop in Geneva in the 16th century, 17th century, and he would go back around because Geneva was kind of a Calvinist stronghold, and he would go throughout Geneva, kind of re-evangelizing the people of the Catholic faith. And he started a society of priests, John Bosco, and named it the Society of St. Francis de Sales. And so that's what you'll see priests nowadays called Salesians. Yeah, sometimes Salesians of Don Bosco, they call themselves. And they're the society that was founded in, it was 1875. by Don Bosco. And their charism is really, youth ministry, youth oriented. I went to a conference recently in Texas, a kind of a parish conference, and one of the priests there was from Florida, and he was from he was from New York originally, but he was stationed in Florida. He was a Salesian priest, and I had read about Salesians before, but I had never actually met one that I knew was a Salesian. I probably met one on the street in New York as a kid and never knew it, but I met this priest and Father Steve gave a talk at he gave the homily at the opening mass, and it really struck me. He gave the homily at the opening mass for this conference, and the homily really struck me as, really like grounded and very relatable. It was like it was speaking at a very common level, down to earth homily, and it really felt like it hit home with me too. It was like he was talking to me, and then I talked to a few of the guys that were there. It was a men's conference. I talked to a few of the guys that was there, and they said, yeah, they felt like he was talking to them particularly too. So he kind of had this quality to where it felt like he was speaking directly to you. And I ended up talking to him afterwards, and really a real down to earth guy. Like, what you would think of is like a movie if he was cast to be the parish priest from New York. This was like he was from Central Casting, and his father was a fireman in New York City, and he was from Staten Island, and all these things. It was like he was booked for this part. And he gave a talk at the conference, and the talk, he used a lot of props, and at the conference later on the next day was like a family conference, And so he's giving the talk, and there's all kinds of younger people there, there's kids there, and he's using props on stage, and he's really, breaking it down for the younger people about, the importance of the call to holiness and putting Christ central in your life and things like that. And he really, really broke it down. I mentioned it to someone afterwards. I can't believe how he spoke to the 80-year-old woman in the front row. He spoke to me. He spoke to the 10-year-old kid that was sitting beside me. It was like every person got, but the kids really seemed to be paying attention to it. And she said, yeah, well, he's a Salesian. Like, I'm supposed, of course, that's their thing. And I said, well, I don't really know exactly what that means. They said, well, that's basically what they do, is they preach to kids. They break it down to the kids. They draw the kids in with whatever they need to. Like Don Bosco would do magic tricks to get their attention. And once he had their attention, then he would hit them over the head with truth. Hit them over the head with the gospel after he had their attention. And that's what Father Steve done. So that really stuck with me. That like, wow, this is, it's a great way to really grab people's attention, was their method of doing things. And that's, it's been 140 years since Don Bosco founded them, and they're still doing it.
In our community, we have a Salesian school, and all of my colleagues, like in our parish, we have, maybe in my batch, there are people, I think 6 or 7 of them have become Salesian priests.
Right.
We have one Jesuit, one Redemptorist, and one Archdiocesan priest. But because we have a school, these guys talk about vocation very, very early. Like,
right.
So great, they're talking to children about vocation through their school and college and work life. It's at the back of their mind that they have something about vocation. So, in fact, if our listeners are listening, if you're considering a school for your child, please consider a Salesian school or a Jesuit school. Faith formation occurs very early in these schools.
Yeah, because if you see a lot of these saints we talk about, the ones that are priests or nuns, religious, they all seem to get a calling, early enough in life. Some of them, I mean, like St. Augustine, he got called when he was like 40 years old, so he had a late call in life. But most of them have a young calling. You really got to nurture that. You have to be open and attentive to the Lord to be able to hear that when it comes. If Don Bosco hadn't been such a religious and such a devout child, maybe he wouldn't have paid attention to them dreams that he had as a child, or when he ran away from home and this priest took him in, maybe he would have took advantage of the priest and stole off him, and didn't listen to his counsel and stuff. So you really gotta raise a child up in the ways of the Lord. When they get old, they won't depart from him. That's what it says in Proverbs.
What else about the ministry of Don Bosco? Because I have not really come across miracles or things like that happening, except that his service to the youth was so much effective.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I didn't, he wasn't really like a miracle worker or a faith healer or anything. He ministered, though. He lived the Beatitudes. He ministered to the poor. When Jesus says, like, when I, welcome to the kingdom, when he separates the sheep and the goats, and he says, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was sick, you He helped me when I was naked. He clothed me when I was in prison. You visited me. He done all these things. He would go into prisons and visit. That's what really started his ministry. When he first was a priest in Turin, Italy, he was just ordained, and he went. His first job was to go to the prison and be like a chaplain to the prisoners. And he noticed that a lot of the prisoners were these young, kind of directionless men. Not even men, children, really. I can't even imagine a prison filled with 13 and 14-year-old kids. But this is what he found. And he visited the prisoner. He comforted the afflicted. He clothed the naked. He done all these things. And the spiritual works of mercy, too. So he really lived out, our call to practice the spiritual and corporal works of mercy. And, that's what makes him a saint. That's what we're all called to do, though. So it isn't, we look at all these saints' lives and we examine them all. We've been doing this for about a year now. And we look at them all, and they're all doing things that we're supposed to do. It isn't like they're doing extraordinary things, but it really isn't extraordinary things they're doing because we're all called to do them. It's the few that actually answer the call. So it's kind of a motivator, too, when you look at them and you see any one of us can go to a prison and visit prisoners. Any one of us can feed the hungry or clothe the naked. Like, we can do these things, instruct the ignorant. There's all these different corporal and spiritual works of mercy that we could all practice in our own lives, even with people we know.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be strangers.
You can always pick a niche that maybe you've been through. Like, there are certain things that we experience and we understand what it feels like, and we can help other people. So just like Don Bosco helped other youth, maybe there's something in our own life which requires ministering, and then we can reach out to those people.
Yeah, and that's what makes different saints different patrons of different things. It's not that we can't pray for the intercession of Don Bosco if we have cancer. People usually pray to St. Peregrine when they have cancer because St. Peregrine had cancer. So it's usually things that these saints you feel like they have kind of keen interest in. Not that any of the saints wouldn't pray for you or intercede for you anyway, but that's the whole kind of concept behind being a patron saint. And that's why you can find, and you can be like that. You can be a patron saint here on earth to someone in a similar situation as yourself. Like if you went through certain things, you can help someone through that. Just like you said, like Don Bosco, he was kind of a directionless youth, and he was homeless, running away from homeless stuff. So then he turned it around and he helped those that were in his situation as a youth. So yeah, I think that's great advice to look at your own life and see things you've come through, and to kind of take that and turn it and see who can I help with my experience. Because your experience, that you can have book knowledge about things, but to really have experiential knowledge about something really changes the whole dynamic of how you can help people. Even like you see it in your own life, like things that you went through, you can see that you have better experience with it. You can help people from that vantage point.
Did he have any help? Like, because this is a big ministry to undertake. Did he have any financial help, or was it that God, dispensed to him as per the budget of his faith, and then gave him, like, abundantly blessed him?
Right. I don't know. He came from a poor family. When he started the first house in Turin, and at one point they had, I think it was like 800 kids living in the house, and his mother would come and kind of helped him out too, and like help him distribute things to the poor and stuff. But as far as I know, he never had any kind of patron that paid for anything. I'd imagine it was just from donations and stuff.
So that's another thing that you don't need to have a big budget if you're starting a ministry. You can always start small, and then God will provide at some later date.
Started on a shoestring.
Yeah.
Yeah. I recently joined the Knights of Columbus.
Okay.
And it was started because Irish Catholics in America in the 1800s were really looked down upon.
Oh, okay.
And they were the dock workers back east, in the Northeast. And Father Michael McGivney founded this society. Really, what it was for was to provide, because dock workers, was a dangerous job in the 19th century. And this is the 1880s. I think it was started 1888. And it was, if you died on the job, they made sure that your family would receive, back then, whatever it was, like $50 or $100, I guess. It would be like a couple of $1,000s nowadays. But your family would receive like kind of a death benefit, and then make sure you got a funeral. Because a lot of people couldn't afford to bury their own family members. And so that was what the Knights of Columbus was founded for, was to provide kind of a fraternal organization, but also to make sure if you died, because good chance you were going to die young, being a dock worker. If you died, your family would be moderately taken care of. They would at least be able to provide a funeral for you and a few $100 for your kids. So that's what it was founded as. Now it's grown into one of the largest charitable organizations in the world. The Pope called it the strong right arm of the church. So the Knights are out there providing coats to homeless kids. They're out there providing all kinds of things, doing all kinds of across the country, across the world. And it started, like you said, it started in the basement of a parish church in New Haven, Connecticut. So you really can, from small things, big things come.
And congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
So, what else about anything special about Don Bosco? What about the communications? Aren't the Salesians known for their media and communications as well?
I don't know. Are they? From what I know of them, they're really known for youth. Yeah, youth ministry. I don't know. When I think of communications and media, I usually think of the Paulist Fathers.
Okay.
They're very big into media, using media for evangelization. I heard someone, who was it? I was listening to the radio the other day, Catholic Answers, and one of them said that if the internet was around back in the days of St. Paul, he would definitely be on the internet. It's the greatest tool of evangelization. It just shows the two-edged sword that everything in the world is. You got the internet has enabled human traffickers and child pornographers and arms dealers, like all kinds of really the worst of humanity, to really connect with each other and do things. But it's also allowed for evangelization on a scale that's never been seen before. So it really is, there's light and dark to everything. But yeah, that's what the Paulist Fathers are very big into, the new evangelization through new media.
What was his connection with Dominic Savio? If you read up something on it?
Yeah, he was one of his pupils, like one of his students, and he actually wrote the biography of Dominic Salvo, and kind of pushed for his canonization. He was kind of the motivating factor behind that. I really don't know much about him personally, though.
So it also goes to show that he mentored others just as he was mentored, and that's an example for us too, that what we receive, we should be able to give out to other people as well.
Pay it forward.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, someone done something nice for you, do something nice for someone else. But especially in the spiritual life, it reminds me of, there was Jesus told a parable about a servant gets called in, and he owed, I can't remember the details, but he owed a lot of money. It was basically like 2 or 3 years' wages. And he couldn't pay it. And the master said, well, I'm going to have you thrown in the dungeon and tortured until, I don't know why that would make you want to, that would make you come up with more cash if you're in the dungeon being tortured. If you don't have it, you don't have it. But he begged him and begged him, please don't. And he said, okay. He said, you know what? I'm going to forgive you of your debt. And so he goes out, and he goes to a guy that owes him basically the equivalent of like $5. And he says, I don't have it. And he says, you know what? He grabs him by the shirt and says, you know what? I'm going to have your wife and kids thrown in that dungeon. I'm going to have you tortured until you pay me every penny. And the guy begs him and pleads. The master finds out about it and calls him in and says, I forgave you a sum that was 1,000 times higher than what he owed you. And you didn't show mercy to him, so now you're being thrown in the dungeon. And it just reminds me that we have been shown the ultimate mercy. We're all stained by original sin. We're all stained by personal sins we've committed. And without a Savior, we're bound for hell. So we've been saved and redeemed and purchased by the blood of Christ. So we have to then go out and take this mercy we've been given and give it to others. We have. It isn't just like we should. We have to. It really is. We're called to go out. This is what it means to be a baptized Christian, is to live the gospel and to take what we have and share it with others.
It's good that you mentioned that. This week, I remember there's something that happened and I lost my temper. And I was honestly saying, God, I can't believe I said this, but I said, God, it's your job to take revenge and it's my job to pray. And I had this quote that somebody sent me, and it was C.S. Lewis's quote, which said, God has forgiven the inexcusable in you, and so you should forgive the inexcusable in others. And it struck me because it was true. I just been for a confession this week, and I had come out and I had said this, that God, you take revenge. So it's really hard in real life to practice, but then
it is.
Yeah, but then God showed.
But it's a great. It's a great thing, yeah, because I mean, I try to remind myself of that too when someone does something to me, or whenever I feel like I'm holding a grudge against someone or anything like that, or I think like I've done things, it's completely off topic, but I was listening to the radio a few years ago. I was driving, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, and they were talking about the death penalty on the radio, and like it was a Christian radio. I don't think it was a Catholic station; it was just a Christian station, and said, why are you like for or against the death penalty? And the host of the radio show said, well, he said, if you think about it, every one of you that's listening have committed a sin. If we were living according to the Old Testament, that is worthy of death. Because there's a bunch of death and death penalty sins in the Old Testament, and yet Christ still died for you. So how can you say someone else should die for their sin? And I was like, wow, it really knocked me over the head. So it was really, and that's how I try to remind myself of that whenever I really get really angry with someone and think like, what they've done to me isn't anything compared to what I've done to God, because God's all holy and I've sinned against him. And that's that's an unforgivable thing to sin against all holy God. That's ultimate in sin, really, in like a transgression. It's an unpayable debt, and yet the debt was paid. So how can I be mad at my brother if this was what was done for me? It really is a humbling thing when you think about it. Yeah, who am I to hold a grudge? The creator of the universe didn't hold a grudge.